death or some other devastating loss. It's akin to the manuscript of our lives being torn to shreds, and grief is the journey we're on as we rewrite and live into the emerging story of our lives. I'm going to hit record in a little bit. If we can, I'd love to start where I start with all of my guests over these last 4 years, really helping us all interrogate, where do our grief beliefs come from?
This is a beautiful question. So
I don't think very often about this.
I think I describe my family as grief averse.
So when I was in the first grade, I was a tall, gangly, bucktooth kid. And the kid that looked out for me when the others were bullying, his name was Willie.
But it was when my grandmother was buried.
there was a grieving process there that was kind of clenched jawed.
Stiff upper lip. How come this was never discussed?
Yeah.
And I remember not being allowed to go to her funeral. I remember asking why I couldn't go. And the answer was, you're too young.
My memories were being teased on the playground, Willie defending me, another kid hitting him with a brick. And then I never saw Willie again.
I really never heard about her.
And that was kind of it. So we didn't really hold space for grief and loss in my family.
At such a young age in our culture, we try to protect people from death and dying as if it's not a part of the natural life cycle.
Yeah.
One of the things that we, in some ways, grieve, to be able to imagine and have dreams, to imagine the future.
I can't remember if you know about my current cancer diagnosis, and this is me. I don't think I'm centering fun enough in my life anymore. For me, it's almost always with nature. It's walks or hikes. Now that I get to live by the ocean, if I can put my feet in the water. I'm a scuba diver, so when I have the luxury of diving, which I don't right now as I'm going through cancer treatment, diving is, I think fun is actually too small of a word. It's sort of a state of meditative bliss. And be in conversation with people. So whether that's reading or listening to a podcast or being in conversation as a host of a podcast, that lights me up.
Don't be shy. Tell me how you feel. I will. Try these.
I was a child of the 70s, so we were pretty, as they say, feral, left to our own devices. I can remember literally getting on my bike in the morning at 9 a.m. and being like, see ya parents at 7, and there was no phones and nobody knew where we were. So there was that kind of freedom. Both parents were working a lot. When I came home from school, it was General Hospital and soap operas and The Love Boat and Fantasy Island. I remember getting lost in TV being kind of an escape. Listening to music was absolutely what carried me through so much of my childhood. I just remember the tuning into the radio, getting the cassette tapes out, waiting till the radio played that song, recording it. Making mixtapes for friends felt a lot like a love letter sometimes. Music and the lyrics of music of that day also were a soundtrack to my own emotional journey that we have just generally as teenagers, the journey that I had being a survivor. I was raped when I was 15 and held against my will for 12 hours. And at the time in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of trauma-informed therapy or insights around that, and families certainly didn't know how to talk about that. One of the reasons I ended up becoming a social worker and then eventually specializing in grief was there was this inability of the particular provider I went to anyways, to actually understand how to hold space and bear witness. And really what we need when we are, leveled to our core is a safe container, because that's what's kind of taken from us. And so I had that in the back of my mind for a long time, and when I ended up going in for my master's in social work, that was what my concentration was around the healing practices of holding space and bearing witness. How do I show up and hold space for people? One of the great growths, I think, in media that has really served me in my own healing, I feel like I was one of the early consumers of podcasts. Early on after my husband's death, I was 40 when he died, he was 44, our daughter was 7. You know, the people around me hadn't experienced partner loss. And so I was really looking for information just to continue my connections. And I really started listening to TED Radio Hour, where you kind of get this variety of learning on topics.
We find the music an easier, more comfortable place for us to reveal what we're really feeling.
On Being with Krista Tippett has been a profound podcast.
She has decoded the language of elephants and was among the first scientists to discover that whales are composers of song.
It was very difficult for a long time to really find the language to communicate with the people in my life about what it was like to walk in the world as a young widow and now as an only parent, and even to find the language to myself. And I could find an episode or a podcast or a poet or an interview, and instead of communicating it, I could share it with somebody. That's where I started to have the spark, actually, which is what led to creating my own podcast, which was like the healing part for my own journey of just hearing stories that made me feel less alone in my pain, which I think is what we are all craving. Mark shares how loss was discussed and addressed in his childhood after learning about the loss of his twin sister. I think grief in the West has been really co-opted in harmful ways. We wanted to make it into 5 stages. We wanted to make it very linear. We wanted to make it neat. And media, as an extension of our culture, portrayed that.
You can expect to go through 5 stages. The first is denial.
No way, because I'm not dying.
Second is anger.
Why, you little
After that comes fear.
What's after fear? What's after fear?
Bargaining.
Doc, you gotta get me out of this. I'll make it worth your while.
Finally, acceptance.
Well, we all gotta go sometime.
Mr. Simpson, your progress astounds me.
My first invitation to people, the tip is stop thinking about that you're just trying to get through to the other side, that there's an end point. And really what you're doing as you move forward in your grief is it's becoming a chapter, it's becoming a part of your whole story. So I'd say a number 1 tip would be to reframe for yourself so that it doesn't feel like we're failing if we're not getting somewhere. I love that more and more people are normalizing humor as a balm to the weight of grief. That's pushing back against that old story of grief takes place at the funeral and then you're done.
Fuck this shit, man! Keep in mind it's my mother and it's a funeral, so I'm emotional. I'm crying. I'm a mess. No. No. She wasn't ready.
And I love that some of these current comedians and writers and thinkers are pushing back to say that there's actually healing in humor, pushing back against toxic positivity. I'm thinking of like Ricky Gervais's Afterlife.
I guess what I'm saying is I don't care about death anymore. I don't mean I want to die, I mean whatever.
Dead to Me with Christina Applegate.
Can't imagine what you're going through.
Well, it's like if Jeff got hit by a car and died suddenly and violently, like that.
Rob Delaney, he lost his young child.
He passed on your birthday, I understand.
So yes, my birthday was destroyed, and I don't have one anymore. I'm now ageless.
His beautiful work talked about the beauty in his son's illness and the caretaking of the nurses in the hospital, and also his use of humor as a healing modality. But it was such a reminder about how powerful medicine it is for us to have representative stories out there on my podcast, in media, in our families, in our communities that speak openly and honestly about something that we all experience. And I think for now anyways, that's a story that will continue to resonate in my mind and remind me that my work is to just keep telling more and more different stories, because we never know whose story is going to touch somebody's life and transform their grief in ways that I could never have predicted. And I've been thinking a lot lately about that grief, yes, can bring tumult and pain and hardship, but grief can also be a gift. One metaphor I love to use is there are millions of stars in the sky. we start to just draw these constellations. And then when we look up, all we can see in the night sky is the Big Dipper and Orion's Belt. And in a way, what narrative therapy does is helps us unfocus and refocus and sort of take a look at, actually, there's all these other experiences, and we might draw different constellations. So while we may have drawn the constellation that these were the 3 times I didn't do well in school, or that I struggled, or that I fell down, if I zoom out, I can look at these other 20 times when someone saw my brilliance and saw my capacity or saw my agency. And now if I keep telling that story and focusing on that, now I might draw a new constellation. I might draw a new possibility. There's just you, kindly, patiently, compassionately rewriting your manuscript, your emerging story. One that includes the memories, the values, the love, and the meaning you're making of what you've lost. Thank you.